Ich glaube, wir fangen mal an.
Well, I think we should get started. I would like to welcome everybody to this afternoon session.
Der deutschen Entwicklungspolitik.
We are going to talk about the reorganization of German development cooperation. And here at the panel, there are 5 colleagues, and I do hope that the last one is going to join us. Mr. Bischof Niens is not yet here, but I do hope he'll join us shortly so that he can participate in the panel discussion. Let me introduce the panelists here. So first of all, we have Ms. Sudmann from German Watch. She's a financing expert. She used to work with DG for 16 years, and she was active in the financing section. Then we have Ms. Friederike Kaiser from the Global Development Corporation from the Green Party. So, okay, everybody can hear me now. She is the deputy head of the BAG of Global Development, and at the same time, she is in the caucus of the Green Party, but BAG is not an institution of the caucus head, but from the Green Party. Then Mr. Georg Rauch from Freie Universität Berlin. He is a professor, and he worked at SLE for several years, and thus he is an expert in agricultural economy. And then Mr. Steinhilber from the BMZ, from the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. You've heard him this morning already, and I do hope that we'll have an interesting panel discussion. And later, once the panel discussion has proceeded, we've got a white chair here, and then you can apply for taking a seat in the white chair so that you can join in the discussion. So I will ask you later on who wants to take that seat. It's not marginalized, it's just at the rims. And, well, this morning we heard already during the different presentations that there is a paradigm shift going through the world, and, well, alliances have not fulfilled their missions. When thinking of global poverty rising, the climate crisis, and also the development goals are also very distant at the moment. So the global order, the liberal global order, is being challenged at the moment, not just because of the lack of performance, but also due to the fact that the BRIC states, the global south, and China are on the rise now. And this rise is economic, but also technological. If you think of China, China is an enormous innovative power worldwide, and is pressurizing other countries also due to exports. And low-income countries and middle-income countries are included as well. And thus it's a big development, a big change that has surprised us. And we have raised expectations concerning what we can achieve in the international community, but these goals have partly not been fulfilled. So it's a big challenge that we have to work on. But there is one thing on top. The global south has arisen in other ways as well. It's thanks to a big education revolution. People from the global south have expanded their potential, and their technologies have progressed as much as ours. And thus they depend less on cooperation in the framework of development aid. At least this is what I have heard during my travels through the global south. This morning it was a very, very interesting discussion. thinking of artificial intelligence, and this really changes our look upon the world. And thus, there are less people due to the advent of robots and a shift from the industrial society to a service society. That means it's a transformation that goes along with the big urbanization, and this is what Mr. Lobos has described this morning. And thus, development cooperation is being challenged because these are the new realities, and economic cooperation, development cooperation has been substantially reduced by some countries, the Brits and the French and the Germans, not just the United States. But there are two states that do it the other way around. It's Korea and Ireland, and they are stepping up their cooperation, and they say it's a task for the future. It is of paramount importance, and it should serve our populations as well. That means the legitimization of development cooperation, and then international cooperation is now being shattered. And it is also not just the advent of right-wing extremists, but it's also in the general population that the importance is not seen that this way. And international cooperation is thus impacted by the fact that 1/3 has a positive opinion, 1/3 is neutral, and 1/3 has a negative view on international cooperation. And then next to the public opinion, there's another challenge. The budget is being restricted all the time. And then political foundations have more or less been silent for a long time. In other words, this shying away, this being silent is a problem, because if you don't prioritize important challenges, as Mr. Steinhuber put it correctly, there will be a true problem, and we will talk about it. And that means
die es hier geht. So, daran wird sich die neue Regierung messen lassen. Wohin geht die Reise?
Good field cooperation is over, it has been said. So new ideas are needed. How can we perform better? How can we create more coherence? All these are topical questions. And Ms. Radovan, the new minister, has paramount tasks awaiting her. Of course, she has a ministry and many other cooperation partners, but she is now really being challenged to set new rules. And of course, the new coalition is setting the rules, that's clear. And if we can contribute our ideas, well, the budgetary negotiations will start next month only. Thus, the minister and her ministry and many others can still take an influence and make an impact, because cooperation has to be strengthened, contribute ideas, no hegemony, and then SDGs have to be put in the center, because these sustainable development goals are somewhat being neglected in the discussion. And I have got a question that I would like to address to everyone on the panel. If you were in a consultation with the minister, well, Mr. Steinhuber has had several deliberations already, so maybe you can report on the trends, what perspectives you have, and what the coalition agreement offers in terms of potential in order to strengthen development cooperation. And to the others, what would you hope to achieve if you had this type of conversation? What are the goals that should be prioritized Mr. Steinhilber, would you like to start? Or would you prefer to listen to the others? Then you can tell us how realistic this is, like, oh, we are working on it anyways, or maybe you'll get some fresh ideas. So let us start off on the left, so everybody has got like 2 or 3 minutes. Well, I would recommend the minister to heed everything that we heard this morning, to take these hints very seriously, the new conditions, the new challenges that you summarized so nicely, and also the new role away from aid towards an approach based on partnership and global problems in the public sphere, like global public goods. My big but would be the minister should by no means put the focus on the new challenges alone and thus neglect the well-known challenges from the past, because poverty continues to prevail in many countries of the world, and we are really far from achieving the goals, the number 2 of the Sustainable Development Goals, zero hunger. We are far from that. And it is time and again that in development cooperation we risk that we are fascinated by the new challenges while neglecting the well-known challenges from the past, and by thus achieving the promises and meeting the promises that we have made in the past. That means the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly number 1 and 2, that is eradication of poverty and eradication of hunger. I think this is somewhat mentioned in passing, like, okay, we'll do that on the go, but we'll focus on our geopolitical positioning. No, it's not that. If we do not master and if we do not manage to devise new concepts in order to reach progress in achieving Sustainable Development Goals number 1 and 2, we will not be successful in geopolitical aspects, because then the migration problems will not be solved and we will not make a contribution towards an increase or stabilization of world peace and its stabilization. And all our lofty goals, like democracy and the rule of law, can be forgotten, because those who are daily battling for the minimum of their survival, so any other political goals will be neglected.
Thank you very much, Theo. This is a very good introduction to this conflict between the SDGs, or keeping the SDGs, or working in the realization of the SDGs, and the consequences that arise if we do not, which is a lack of trust. So, Ms. Kaiser, what do you say? Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm quite happy to be here today. I would very briefly like to say that the BAG consists of very committed members of the Green Party that are also working in this field. And, of course, based on our discourse, we provide advice to office holders and also different parliamentary groups. That much as an introduction. So if I had a discussion with a minister, I would say, well, please be courageous and self-confident in the next weeks, because the International Development Cooperation has, over the past months, taken a few hits. However, we have fought a few fights. The BMZ is standing, and the next big thing will be the budget. So please fight for the new budget, because this is what we will need. And I personally, also last year, would have liked to see more commitment of Svenja Schulze into that direction. This is why I'm quite interested to see how it will be with the new minister. So more self-esteem also means that the BMZ needs to have clear political targets for this legislative period. And also regarding the vague wording of the coalition agreement, this should be used in order to think about how we want to cooperate with the new partners, how we want to set up the new structure, and then we should be fully committed and engaged. Well, let me briefly ask, where would you set priorities if the budget undergoes a cut? And it seems that the budget might see a cut, so you fight, then the budget might remain. However, there are more and more tasks. And if we want to fulfill the SDGs, then there's a huge topic lying ahead of us. So what would you say if the budget would experience a cut by 1 billion or 500 million? We don't know exactly, and Mr. Steinbiller might be able to tell us more. But what would you say would be the most important thing? Well, of course, we would have to distinguish between what I would personally desire and what is already laid out in the coalition agreement. Well, especially when it comes to the development cooperation, I think we can easily tackle the fight against climate change, because we are working on a challenge that everyone is interested in or should be interested in. And if they are not, they probably will be in the future regarding the increasing impact of climate change. However, in the coalition agreement already lays out clear topics, and I think it's very important that we look at the different sectors that we can agree upon and do not try to cover all sectors. Well, thank you very much. I think the topic of climate change will continue to be part of our discussion. Ms. Sundmann, how does German Watch say, how do you see the situation, and what would you like to tell the minister? Well, we do experience many inconsistencies in the coalition agreement, many things that are not really well devised, some things that are contradictory, where you can see the writing of the different parties, and which is also sometimes difficult to bring in line. So the BMZ or the development cooperation altogether is supposed to provide sufficient climate change funding, and at the same time the BMZ budget is supposed to be cut, and the German economic interests are put at the forefront, but at the same time there should be a North-South Commission. So there's basically everything in the coalition agreement, and we're quite interested to see into which direction all this goes, because the budget negotiations then will play a major role here, because with money you can do politics, and for the climate funding and humanitarian aid, we've already the demand for certain funds. This means that other areas might get less. So this means that there is a fight for the allocation of funding between different topics, which is very problematic from our point of view. If the fight against poverty is weighed against the fight against climate change, or the development of rural areas, whether this is more important maybe than health protection or not. And at the same time, we ask ourselves, how can the economic interests with regard to raw material partnerships be facilitated, and how can we at the same time, via a North-South Commission, take into account the point of view of the Global South? I mean, this does not always have to be a contradiction. I want to emphasize that. And both sides, of course, are relevant and important. But I would like to encourage the minister, on the one hand, to fight for a strong budget, and on the other hand, also to not to lose sight of the economic interests of Germany, because this is very important for the acceptance within society, and this does not have to be a contradiction to the interests of the Global South. I mean, if you listen to their voices and in the course of partnerships at level playing field, if you work in this area. Well, this partnership idea seems to be quite important for everyone. Mr. Steinhilber, what would you tell the colleagues as a piece of advice? Should they go to the ministry? I mean, in the traffic light coalition, you already contributed in a leading role, and now you had to do a little shift. I mean, there's a new coalition with slightly different focus. So what would you say? Well, thank you very much. Maybe a few points. Well, first of all, from my point of view, the colleagues are on the right track. And at the same time, this also clearly shows the dilemma. So on the one hand, the minister has already said that she would like to focus. This is also what people expect. And at the same time, we have to say that there's nothing the German development politics is not covering. So I've been at the BMZ for 3 to 4 years now. And so basically, we cover everything. And so I think it's very important to focus. And there it becomes very tricky. So development politicians, practitioners will always find good arguments for their subjects, no question. And I don't want to play out one thing against one another. So this is one thing. And what I also want to say is that we will take this coalition agreement very seriously. Apart from very vague headlines, it also comprises very concrete things and also technical issues, which are important. For example, the question of opening up the BMZ for more competition, the question of tenders. There are always attempts from the German economy. They say they do have too little chances, and there's also this country list, and usually the technical and financial cooperation is bound there. So this is what we have to focus on. I mean, this is not an official focus, but this is something that we'll have to tackle. And from my point of view, this allows for the 3 pillars. So one, the question of the coalition agreements, then the focus of the minister, things that she's going to stress. And they, of course, are also at least partly in line with the coalition agreement. Topic of flight, I already mentioned it this morning, but also when it comes to regional issues, Northern Africa, Middle East. And the third column, third pillar, will take or is going to be, apart from the coalition agreement and the special focus of the minister, will be an IZ reform of the international cooperation. And there will probably be concrete aims, and we'll have to devise how we want to implement them. So this goes hand in hand with some technical issues and politics, of course. I'd like to mention one or two other things. So from my point of view, I mean, I cannot yet tell you what the focus of the minister will be. But, and this is what the ministers already said in some statements, and also the foreign minister, we will, in this legislative period, be very committed when it comes to our foreign policy out of one hand, so to speak. So the disputes over competencies and others will no longer happen. We have to stop that. And this is why this topic, that's also part of the coalition agreement, should be taken very seriously. So this integrated security, this intersection is very important, because my party for quite a long time has not been an advocate of the National Security Council. But I do believe that we need this common culture. And I really think that this will be very fruitful. I mean, we do not know how it will be devised in the medium or long term, but anyway, and we also have to focus on poverty and hunger. However, the question once again is how can we tackle the question of hunger? When I say we have to focus, then we might connect this more strongly to the issue of crises, because some countries might hold the view that they can tackle the issue alone or that they need regulation. And I also mentioned this morning that other countries might need a completely different support. So we need a differentiated approach according to the different backgrounds of different countries. It's quite clear. And I think we'll have to make an effort also in the BMZ to take a close look at the different countries. What are the interests of the different countries? Where can we cooperate in order to focus here? Well, but, and I would like to say this very openly, we will still be faced with the problem of this focus. I think we will have to think about, and I already mentioned it this morning, about our big toolbox. And there might also be problems that we'll have to tackle via civil society, democracy promotion, and there are also other topics, and this is just my personal opinion, that we have to look at more from a multi-perspective way from different countries. For example, health is one thing, but this is just my personal perspective. I mean, we're not yet there. And there might also be topics where we say, okay, we cannot do anything about it anymore because we have too little resources, or maybe others are better, or we'll have to do it at the European level. So the development policy at the European level, of course, is not really at the forefront. We know that. But all in all, I think we are on the right track. And I can promise you the ministry will definitely fight for a strong budget. But we do also see in what situation development cooperation is at the moment. And also in the public eye, the impression has arisen that via the special fund and the partial stop of the debt brake, the overall debt problem would be solved. But this is not the case. We have huge problems when it comes to setting up a budget and all other areas. And insofar, I can only say yes, and the minister has already mentioned it, she will fight for this budget. In how far she'll be successful, we'll have to wait and see.
Schönen Dank erstmal, Herr Steinhilber. Ich habe
Mr. Steinhilber. I have got one tiny remark. We always discuss about our responsibility for the global problems. And you said in one sentence, at the example of hunger, that the countries concerned have a responsibility too. It looks as if we could save the world if we stepped up our efforts, but the developing countries or the global South also has its own responsibility. If we only look at ourselves, there's one part, of course, how we organize ourselves, but the countries in the global South also have to wonder, like, what have been their mistakes. I've worked in Africa, and I've seen that there are governments like autocratic military governments, and they have little interest in fighting poverty, and we cannot help everywhere. So there is also a responsibility of the countries concerned themselves. But just as a little remark on the side. So would anyone like to say something to Mr. Steinhilber? So we have the expertise from the ministry, so do make use of the opportunity. And there are many hints. There will be fierce negotiations. So I think it's a justified question, like, what would you recommend the minister to do and what to avoid? I think it looks quite balanced for the time being. Well, I would like to know what the role of the private economy is and what strengthening they're planning to do. For example, mobilization of private funds. we said, well, we need a rethinking, because I was active in the former government. So there are overarching questions like strategic positioning of development cooperation, and the other one, mobilization of private capital. And I think this continues to be a central role. And then I like to say, like, we have initiated a major
Neuaufsetzung von Fonds etc., KfW.
Ideas like restructuring global funds, like the KfW is active here. And of course, it's not a panacea, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So we need areas where we are doing well, and with others there is room for improvement. And it also says in the coalition agreement that economic cooperation will happen, and we sometimes have to overcome fears of joining shoulders with people that we are not used to. So everybody needs to get moving, and the private economy needs to tell us what they want, what they need, where they need support, because often one makes sure, okay, the BMZ has, a certain economic responsibility, and there are different approaches, in fact, like vocational training, all the way through to the regulation of regional economic alliances. So the macro to the micro level is possible, and at the same time, you need to open access for the German economy, and we should make an effort here. But I think we need to be realistic at the same time. To give you one example, there has been debate about the participation of German companies in financial cooperation, and it is less in a European comparison, and I think this is where we need to fill room for improvement. But there are areas where the German economy has few interests, and the German economy really needs to join the efforts at an early stage, and we need tendering for that. And there are already competitive elements via the GEZ in the framework of the BMZ, and we really need to check where to start. The sustainability conference, we already got offers for the German economy, and like green shipping and other projects, we have made agreements already, and this is where we need to continue our efforts. Thank you. Theo Rauch, would you like to comment on that? Or Ms. Kaiser?
Zum letzten Punkt. Also ich gehöre jetzt
on the last item, I'm part of the generation who
nahezu, ja, sagen wir mal, die Jungsteinzeit.
I mean, this is really like the early Stone Age of German development cooperation. This is where I come from. I still have horror in remembering those nights where we had to fill out catalogs and say why in northwestern Zambia in our development program, why we preferred Land Rovers of Japanese make compared with Mercedes. So we needed to justify that. So this was what they asked for, and well, it really made me shudder when I had to remember that, and I sometimes feel reminded of that. So it must not be the goal of the German economy, like solving the employment problems in Africa or elsewhere. This would really be a fatal step in the wrong direction. it would be a step backwards. And I
das
really
Engagement
believe that dedication, engagement, and the dedication of the German economy needs to be pragmatic and realistic with a view to the interests of the German economy. I have been part of many conferences, sometimes in Berlin, high level, the president of Germany with high-ranking economic representatives, and they were discussing what could be helpful for the economy, because basically German SMEs had a certain intent and calculation, and in fact they did not see any meaningful investment conditions in Africa. But in fact, the foreign private investment, direct investment, is mainly in exploiting resources and also in the privatization of public services. For example, water works in Bolivia, Cochabamba. This was a famous example at the time. And also areas where the market was taken away from local players, where, for example, furniture companies from the global south and then local carpenters actually lost their jobs, really, or there was no positive effect. That means no jobs were created, whereas the goal should be to create more jobs than to kill them. So I would suggest that the goal of employment in the partner countries should really be put in the focus. And then the German economy should be encouraged to invest there, to invest in new areas, instead of replacing German African or local manufacturers by big providers from the global north. Instead, local manufacturers should be fostered, and it is about working on local resources and on fostering the local economy. Thus, put the employment effect in the center, and then the sponsoring of foreign direct investment can happen. But at the moment, it all sounds like a development cooperation needs to be oriented along our own needs. Nothing speaks against it, but it shouldn't be put in the focus. So I really need to scrutinize whether the German economy is creating better conditions in order to make people earn a living, or will the conditions deteriorate? And these conditions need to be taken seriously. With all reports that I read about, private investment and so on, all these programs, compact, but the employment effect is not even mentioned in the reports. And if so, 17 jobs were created with this scheme without scrutinizing how many jobs were lost at the same time. So this is as much as economic cooperation is concerned, yes, but the development policy goals and employment goals need to be put in the center. This is just a remark on the side. And we keep mentioning hunger, and it sounds like Minister Müller also put this in the focus. Food production was important to him. But the contribution towards eradication of poverty and the reduction of hunger can happen by the fact that people who work in the cities who are employed on a daily basis, who earn money in order to feed their families at the end of the day, and that these people will end up empty-handed. They often return home empty-handed, and in at least 50% of hunger in African countries, this is the case. So, securing food, that's a sustainable development goal, and this is at least as important as the others. That's a valid point, but we shouldn't believe that German investment alone can solve this problem, because there were 20,000 jobs that were created by German investment, 130,000 by the Chinese. This is less than 1% of all jobs that were created in Africa. So this is basically a task of the local governments, so to really fund SMEs and smallholders. So really, we must not exaggerate what we can actually do. What can a German Development Corporation do in order to foster the local economy? This is what the DEG doing without the use of tax funds, and like fostering small and medium-sized enterprises, and they will create the jobs. Our role for KfW and DG is that conditions will be good, adequate social standards and measures in the area of climate protection and vocational training. This should be or is the role of a German Development Corporation, instead of fostering companies that do not even create local value chains. But we have a very big lever here, because many private investments take place only in developing economies, and whereas in many countries that have many conflicts are not as safe and attractive for the German private economy to invest there. And the German Development Corporation can give guarantees here or support the private sector on the spot to support the local economy that basically has a longer-term perspective compared with the German Development Corporation. They think of the next mission or the next tendering, whereas the local stakeholders are on the spot. Local investors want to invest there, and they know best what is needed. So local entrepreneurs know best, and there are also local consulting companies that are important for sustainability also, because they know the local special features a lot better than we do, instead of having a focus on German companies, and this only if the local perspective is neglected.
Well, this is a very important aspect. Ms. Kaiser, you also wanted to add something to it? Well, not exactly on the economic aid, but I found it quite interesting that we stumbled upon the same point, which is the tendering or handing out of development aid funds, or to German companies, or the funding of it, because this is an efficiency criterion which different donor countries, as I've already said, have set themselves many years ago, the OECD DAC, and this would mean that the aid would be taken out again, which was actually abolished. And one other aspect I would like to mention is, which I personally found quite interesting, and this is something that you already mentioned, is the question of or in how far, or put differently, in how far can the funding be handed out no longer by the traditional institutions, but by others, maybe, in order to create more competition. I would like to know whether there are ideas at the BMZ, the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, because there is the possibility to say at the ministry we have a political objective, and now we will not allocate it to a certain title, but we have an independent title, and we will then look at what international organizations or others hand in, instead of allocating these projects certain instruments. Or would you then say that the private consulting business will then be taken into account more strongly? Well, this is a slightly different topic. Maybe the GIZ, is it going to remain the key operator of the ministry? But we will leave that aside for another moment. I'm not sure whether we can do all this with German investment. I think there's quite a good tool set. Of course, you can all criticize this, but there have been instruments that have been developed. The problem is that only few companies from the German side are prepared to work in this framework and to invest, for example, on the African continent. You're quite right. It's above all the medium-income countries like South Africa, Latin America, Asian countries. However, between Cape Town and Casablanca, there's hardly any German investment. In Nigeria, there are 35 German companies doing business there, however, without any investment aid from the ministry. And there are some investments in the field of energy where the ministry also plays a role, but without, or the instruments are not always taken into account. This is also due to mindset problem of the German industry and the small and medium-sized businesses in Germany who prefer to look to China or the Asian continent or elsewhere. And another remark, raw material investments are not being done by Germany. There's no big company. I mean, the last company was Wintershall in Tunisia. However, they sold the company. So we are not a raw materials producer. This was always an idea of the 1970s. We need raw material companies in order to provide for our raw material supply. However, the raw material discussion is not really a key issue in Germany currently. So there is the idea of the Africa Association. I don't remember the name of that person who said it. It said that German companies should get a development aid support when they lead to sustainable job creation and sustainable growth on the ground. I mean, this is a good idea, but it's difficult to achieve because we lack the instruments. Who is supposed to accompany that? What kind of funding should be made available? And then the problem is that the local company is under huge pressure and maybe pushed out of the market. However, this is usually rather done by China, which destroyed many markets. I mean, China is not really a model that we should follow. Just one thing I would like to say here. I mean, foreign direct investment will not be able to solve the job problem in Africa with or without government support. This would be an illusion to believe that. And in all the things that I say, I do assume that the solution of the employment problem is not a task of the international cooperation, but that, as with all other problems, we have to cooperate with the partner countries in order to come up with solutions for these problems. So this is basically the starting point. And part of the employment problem are quite a few other things. Part of it is, for example, a foreign trade safeguard, that the investments in Africa are not protected against European dumping or Chinese dumping competition, is not only an obstacle for potential African investments and companies, but also European small and medium-sized companies, and they are. This is an obstacle to their investment in Africa. Wherever growth has been achieved to a considerable extent in Africa, or let's look at Germany between 1880 and 1900, and Japan at the beginning of the 20th century, South Korea between 1960 and 1980, or China between 1976 and 2001. They only became part of world free trade in 2001. So all these countries only achieved mass employment through a consistent, well-thought-through industrial policy, plus complemented by safeguards from abroad, which means a focused and targeted and protected customs policy. So German companies and others can only play a minor role here. So what I would like to see is that the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development embarks on a cooperation in the field of industry and employment policy. I mean, this is not really a task for businesses, but these are basically paths that need to be laid out by the state, that every business needs in order to conduct a good employment policy. And the issue of employment is not really mentioned in the coalition agreement. Okay, so this would be a suggestion if you would go to the ministry to pick up that topic and yes. The interpreters unfortunately cannot hear what is being said because no mic is being used.
Okay. Ja, herzlich willkommen, Herr Bischof.
Well, welcome, Tobias Bischof Niemz. We have started with the topic on economics. Would be great if you would make a contribution here. I mean, we talked about the possibilities of employment through development cooperation, support, foreign direct investment and jobs, but we also found out that the jobs can only be created on the ground and that foreign direct investment are not the solution actually to this problem. But still, the issue is, how does the business world work or cooperate with government development aid? For example, one topic could be the provision of risk capital to support governance on the ground through consulting, to support the banking system, and many other measures where we could do something. But we also realized that in the coalition agreement, this is not really at the heart of the debate. I think that it's more strongly in the center of the debate than over the past years, and I can say a few words after that. Well, welcome. Could you please explain how you see the cooperation with the development cooperation in view of the investment activities that you are conducting? Well, I'm happy to do that. I'm sorry for being late. So the calendar is actually dictating my day, and when there's something wrong in it, then of course I come late. Well, it's the more nice to be here now. The nicer to be here now. I represent the company Enertrag. We are a renewable energy investor and provider here from the Uckermark, quite close. So we are quite big in Eastern Germany and represented in 10 different federal states. And or also in 10 other countries, and some of them belong to the emerging markets, where we have developed renewable energy projects with the objective, of course, to implement them and to invest there and to also maintain these projects in the long run. So we are a classical infrastructure operator, and over decades we are committed to the respective country that we are in and into which we invested. So maybe a brief idea from my side. Well, it's quite a specific thing regarding what we do. But despite that, the kind of investment that we do is quite typical for many companies in the infrastructure investment scene. So when we develop a project in the field of solar energy, wind energy, green hydrogen production, which can provide energy to many export markets, all this is infrastructure investments in the sense that we invest or have to invest a lot of money at an early point of time. We do not have any running costs. This is quite a good thing about renewables compared to fossil fuel power plants, where large parts of the cost arise in the course of the operation. So when it comes to renewables, this is not the case. The costs arise at the beginning, but I need a long-term security in terms of my investment in order to be able to invest at the beginning and run a project in the long run. And this is exactly the problem in many emerging markets. So I do not have this security in terms of my investment, where I know for the next 20 years I'll be able to generate enough revenue with this plant. So a wind farm costs 150 or 200 million euros, and if I cannot generate electricity at a given price in an electricity market which does not really exist, then it's very difficult to invest this amount of money. Of course, I would do that if I knew, similar to the diesel generator, that my investment will pay off after 2 years, because I can look ahead for 2 years and I can conclude contracts for this period of time. But if I would do it with a wind farm, then the electricity from the wind farm will be so expensive, because I would have to regain my investment after the first 2 or 3 years. This would not make any sense. And of course, it would neither be right from a macroeconomic point of view, because the investments that we make are infrastructure investments, and they're not supposed to pay off after 2 years. So there are investments that need to pay off after 2 to 3 years, no question. But when it comes to infrastructure, there we should rather talk about decades and not about 2 to 3 years. And this is a problem that we are faced with when it comes to renewables. And it might also be true for all the other infrastructure investments. So I think that in terms of a development cooperation, we could more strongly focus on providing safeguards. Why can't we invest? Because when it comes to the consumption side, we do not have any safeguards. So on the one hand, we have the physical product, our kilowatt hour. If we cannot sell it at all, then of course we have a problem. And the second risk is the price for the kilowatt hour. So in many markets, we do not have an electricity market. There are no public utility companies that could conclude long-term contracts with you. So there's also this price insecurity. And regarding the two problems, they are quite good and established instruments that we know from the European, the US, the Japanese context. So there are instruments out there in order to provide safeguards for these long-term investments. And we think that these instruments could also be applied via the development cooperation in the emerging markets. So contracts for differences is the buzzword here, and we can truly talk about it in the course of the discussion, but I would leave it at that. And it's great to be here.
Thank you very much for these comments. And the question then is, what can the development cooperation achieve? Well, in development cooperation, there's a lot about funding and the funding of funding costs and support of credits. This is what people are talking a lot about. And of course, in development cooperation, there are many development banks banks, and of course their task is to award loans. And well, if the tool that you have is a hammer, then every problem you have is a nail, so that you can hammer the nail. But our investment in renewables, the issue is not financing, but it's their lack or potential lack of clients. So if you have clients, if there is demand that you can get rid of your electricity for 20 years at a given price, then the financing will follow suit. It doesn't mean we do not need any funding support.
Aber zu einem großen Teil wird das Finanzierungsthema dadurch gelöst, dass
a big problem is solved by having the demand. So securing the demand would be a good tool, and they exist. Like there is a financial CFD, for example. It's a tool that could have a global effect. And
Investitionssicherheit,
investment security, 20 years of investment security could thus be guaranteed in any market by securing the external investment without, however, losing the local market out of sight. A local wind farm in Ghana, you can have local sales, and nonetheless, there is a level of insecurity. But by guaranteeing this, you can have the local market act. Then you know the investment is secure. Nonetheless, there are incentives to act in the local market. And this is called financial CFD. Oh, I think this has taught us a lot. Everybody, I think, has learned a lot in the past few minutes. The economic topic, well, is there any question from the audience in terms of economic aspects? I think you wanted to ask a question or make a comment. So they have to wait for the microphone. We are sitting in a soundproof booth. The interpreters speak in, and we wouldn't be able to hear anything without the mic. In practice, it is true that Daimler in Sinsheim
da ist ja deutsche Wirtschaft ganz praktisch involviert.
Parts from Congo, so Germany is involved here. And what scope do we have? What scope of effect?
Kontinent hätten.
Climate change would be a lever, and the German economy actually is contributing to this. Are there any concepts that seek to change that? I just came up with that because you were talking about German companies on the ground. Let's have another question, and then we will hear Mr. Steinhilber's answer. My name is Maria Tiköve, and until I retired, I worked at the BMZ. I worked on bilateral and multilateral cooperation. I'm a bit surprised against the discussion here auf Bilaterales und auf die deutsche. The discussion focuses on bilateral cooperation and the German economy, contrary to this morning. So it would be great if we could also put these into context, the systemic, global, and multilateral developments, also with a focus on the topic of this panel, but maybe this is still going to follow. Then change of perspective, that's an aspect where I have a question for Mr. Steinhilber. And then working at eye level, that's another keyword. Mr. Steinhilber, I would like to know.
Wie haben sich denn die Bedürfnisse, die Fragen, die Bitten, was auch immer, Vorschläge
and suggestions of the multilateral partners evolved, or what have you sensed? So what I'm getting at, it is difficult in this context, but we have a limited context.
Was sind im Augenblick, nehmen wir doch die Afrikanische Entwicklungsbank, oder ist mir egal.
Let's take the African Development Bank or anyone else. What are they suggesting? What should be done? What should be changed? Have they voiced any needs? Do they approach you during the negotiations? I would really like to know about that.
Und um das ein bisschen zuzuspitzen, wo sind da die Konflikte? Ein bisschen
more precisely, what are the conflicts?
Welche Konflikte haben Sie da? Ich kann mir nicht
What conflicts do you see?
die Wirtschaft für bedeuten.
I think the German
Ich kann mir
economy
nicht
is
vorstellen, dass Sie
important.
sich wünschen, dass die
No
deutsche
doubt about
Wirtschaft da, aber vielleicht auch, dass sie da stärker in diesem und jedem Feld aktiv wird. Stichwort China. Und so.
How about the German economy being and getting more active with a view to China and so on? Okay, and then let's
Dann gehen wir über zu diesen anderen Fragen.
conclude this aspect first.
Dank, vielleicht nochmal ein, zwei Punkte genau zur Wirtschaft. Also ich hatte es ja, glaube ich, schon deutlich gemacht. Ich bin der Meinung, da ist Luft nach oben, aber auch Realismus müssen wir da walten lassen. Ich glaube nicht. Tatsächlich auch aus entwicklungspolitischer Perspektive Sektoren haben, wo ich jetzt ehrlich gesagt die deutsche Wirtschaft nicht sehe, auch keine andere Wirtschaft. Und gleichzeitig struktureller Art, Aufbindung ist schon gefallen. Ich sage es jetzt mal, ist meine persönliche Auffassung. Ansonsten trage ich immer den Koalitionsvertrag unter der Achselhöhle natürlich. Also die Lieferaufbindung teuer, ineffizient. Wir sind in der Zwickmühle. Wir wollen, und sage ich nochmal, wir wollen sinnvolle, effiziente Entwicklungszusammenarbeit machen. Ja? So, und gleichzeitig aber stehen wir natürlich dort, Zahlen haben. Von 10 Ausschreibungen dann haben wir ein Problem. Ja? Können wir sagen, okay, ist eigentlich gut, vielleicht auch entwicklungspolitisch gut, wie auch immer, aber wir haben ein Problem politisch. So, also müssen wir da irgendwie auch schauen, dass wir da Land gewinnen, wie auch immer, auch wenn sozusagen auch darüber, dass es natürlich Sektoren gibt, habe ich gerade schon gesagt, wo die deutsche Industrie der andere Punkt, ich bin ein großer Anhänger tatsächlich der finanziellen Zusammenarbeit. Das ist bei uns manchmal auch untergeht, finde ich, aber in den letzten Jahren dranbleiben müssen, innovativ KfW machen das auch, FZ Futures heißt das Stichwort.
Like FZ Future and things like that. So the KfW Bank is working on that.
Finanzielle Zusammenarbeit und aus meiner Sicht auch tatsächlich ein wichtiger Ansatzpunkt.
Financial cooperation, and I think this is a very important approach. But you wanted to know also
wie wir uns die Eröffnung des TZ-Titels vorstellen. Also da sind wir tatsächlich noch nicht ganz so weit, aber wir werden
TZ-Title, well, the technical cooperation that is, there are different possibilities.
Die es ohnehin schon gibt, stärken. Man kann sozusagen
elements can be strengthened, and you can also open this area for NGOs,
BMZ schon titeloffene instrumentenoffene Titel sozusagen, wo wir dann immer auswählen.
Tools
und gleichzeitig müssen wir auf der anderen Seite
but on the other hand, we clearly have to admit that
like
direct commissioning and direct sourcing is, of course, has advantages.
Das müsste alles das BMZ machen, da sind wir überhaupt nicht in der Lage dazu. Wir operieren hier sehr stark unter Überschriften.
And we operate under certain headers, and these headers now need to be filled with the intent to be efficient and targeted in our cooperation, development cooperation. And your comments were really interesting and exciting. So there have to be tools, of course. They have to be varied, particularly in financial cooperation. But I also believe that the future is based on the fact,
aber dass wir nicht immer nur
it's really dedicated, but we shouldn't have a focus on isolated companies, but we should see the greater picture, like how does an entire region benefit. So a regional approach is good. Like how can we promote renewable energies in the region? And if we use different tools, we also have planning security as compared with isolated investment initiatives. And also in the G7 context, we have some major projects. The CHATPs, like joint energy transition partnerships, like in South Africa, they receive support. And like how can the conversion to renewable energies succeed?
Sozusagen, wo es darum geht, auch tatsächlich Industrietransformation zu machen.
Up and running, it is industrial transformation, creating new jobs, and it's a similar transformation process as people know them in East Germany, and it works, and it really works in a bigger context. But just let me briefly say the following. Your question was really interesting, and of course a lot has changed.
Die ganze Überlebensperspektive von
in the more recent past. The question is, will we focus only on the core mandate, or will we look beyond the fence? So I think initiatives have been added. Just let me touch upon that, because you triggered me with that question. The question of fragility, this touches on economy. Again, we are talking about emerging markets. 3/4 are highly fragile, or at least jeopardized by fragility. And thus we need to focus on different conditions. Like the fragility component needs to be scrutinized before
also das ist ein Ding, was jetzt mittlerweile
as a basis for yet something else. So this is important, and every organization, whether it be the World Bank or somebody else, this was one aspect. And the second aspect, it touches on my personal responsibility. So, humanitarian aid and development cooperation. How can we get out of the development aid so that we have a true development perspective? And in the VN80 process, it is exactly these questions that are in the focus, like how can the United Nations pool these different functions? They are under pressure at the moment. I'll leave it here for the time being.
Und dann würde ich mal in die Runde ein bisschen zurückfragen. Schon auf den weißen Stuhl gesetzt, aber ich glaube,
check who else would apply for the white chair. So your cars took it. So you would like to make a contribution. So would you like to apply for that position?
Gleich an. Ja, danke. Ute Kotschi, ich arbeite bei der Nichtregierungsorganisation Urgewalt.
NGO called Urgewalt, and my focus is the World Bank. And I would also like to talk about reinventing Germany's global cooperation. This is a lofty goal because it focuses to the inside and the outside. To the inside, a smaller and a bigger circle. To the inside, it is to convince our own people in the Bundestag how important German development cooperation is. It's a paramount task, but why not? Because people working in the committees, they are not really aware of what is going on. This is advertising for the AWZ, which is also advertising for the BMZ, and then nationally, how do you achieve a situation where development cooperation secures
positiv darstellt mit Blick
and presents it in a positive light? And this under the aspects of justice and fair, global justice and peace. And this means that rich people must not stay rich. These unfair circumstances destroy this planet, and this breathtaking speed. So in those 4 years we have available in this coalition will not be sufficient. But anyways, it is happening in very, very big steps. And I think we must be an activist in order to solve global problems. We really need to look ahead. We need to talk in terms of the future and say, if you want to save this planet and if you want to do it jointly, we need to work jointly and this feminist development cooperation. And then my last point, because, well, the World Bank, public funds, how do we deal with public funds in other development banks? And in what category do we put them and how do we act together? Because this is where we are acting jointly. There are so many countries working in this context of the development banks. But we are acting jointly already, and maybe we should make progress in that discipline. And my last point, no nuclear power, because the debate alone about nuclear power is a ruin for sustainable energies because it shifts transformation into yet another debate. Coal, oil, and gas, that's enough. But if you open yet another chapter, the nuclear one, even for those countries who do not know this, but nuclear power really is the end of a good transformation in the limited time we have.
So this is a call upon the whole federal government and not specifically the development cooperation. So now we hear something from you. I would like to look at the discussion that we had this morning over the changing geopolitical situations and maybe also what Mr. Toos will tell us this afternoon. So I would like to connect this with the economics and industry policy discussion. And also the large topic of disruption to transformation. Well, we are living in a world where we see how the US is destroying itself at the moment. The West is destroying itself and breaking apart. And China is the first electrified state, which is massively investing. And the European economy is running into difficulties also when it comes to renewable energies. And now the development cooperation is now seen in the geopolitical struggles with China in order to give the German economy once again subsidies for exports. At the Africa table recently, someone said that we now would subsidize the exports. Well, I think that we need to have a productive approach towards China in the industrialized strategies in Africa, which really creates jobs there. But these jobs need to be created by the countries themselves. And these industry policy strategies need to be discussed. There's a development and technical component, and we also need the private economy. Well, we also need to provide advice and consult and the private economy, and not against China, but together with China. However, we have to create value added on the ground. It should not be an export market for the German economy, but we should build up an economy and industry on the ground. And this also holds true for minerals. Well, we tend to say we want raw materials, raw materials, raw materials. But we need this triangle relationship with China and the countries in, for example, Africa. May I reply directly? Well, thank you very much for mentioning that. Well, in Namibia, we are about to build a new ammonia project from wind energy, which leads to hydrogen production, green hydrogen production. And regarding Namibia and exports, I mean, this is not a contradiction, of course. coming back to what you said and painting a larger picture, I mean, at the moment, we are at a crossroads. On the energy policy side, we see geopolitical energy streams that reshuffle. And I also see this in the context of the overall security policy discussion, because looking back over the past decades, I can see that many conflicts that were there were, at least in part, driven by the energy question, because the fossil energy that we have is very much concentrated on certain countries, and there's a fight for this one resource. And when it comes to renewables, for example, green hydrogen, it's completely different. A country like Namibia, for example, has a huge potential to produce green ammonia. However, it's not the only country that can do it. So technically speaking, every country in the world can produce green ammonia. One can do it much cheaper, like Namibia, and in another country it's a little bit more expensive. But anyway, it's a completely different situation. This is not really a monopoly. In the fossil fuel segment, we have monopolies. So what do we now need for Namibia from our point of view, from a German or European perspective? When we say we want to diversify our energy sources, why? Because this creates more security and facilitates peace. And we also want to create a value chain in Namibia. Then, of course, we need the investments that I talked about in the beginning. We need these investments in Namibia. And we need long-term safeguards for these investments. The good thing about such a green ammonia project at the size of what we are doing it is that the local market is being taken care of as a side product, so to speak. Just to give you an insight into the dimensions, if we are successful with this project, then we will have 30 terawatt hours of electricity per year, which will be converted into ammonium. Namibia, at the moment, needs 4.5 terawatt hours of electricity. So this electricity surplus coming from our project alone is more than sufficient in order to completely decarbonize Namibia when it comes to electricity generation. So 1/3 electricity imports, which is coal-based electricity, can then be replaced if our project succeeds, because on the one hand we will provide or create sufficient electricity for Namibia, and we will even be able to export this electricity. So from my point of view, we have to be much more strategic. We should not always only look at individual projects. Of course, decisions are being taken at the project level, but we need a programmatic approach so that we do not simply invest in one of these projects or two, but in many projects like this. And I think we, as Europe, we need energy. Namibia, the country, the state Namibia, needs secure investment. Namibia itself is also an investor, so we are investors, but Namibia, the state of Namibia, is investing as well. We are co-investors, and so Namibia should have long-term security in terms of the price, consumption price. And so Namibia should also know that the electricity will be, the surplus will be imported to Europe, and thus in turn would lead to funding possibilities they do not have at the moment. So if the European imports of this electricity is safeguarded, then of course this would allow for further investments into Namibia. And regarding the value creation, I mean, when we are producing ammonium at the moment in Namibia, it's also a basic product that we need in the fertilizer industry. It is also produced by BASF in Germany, for example. So today it's being created based on natural gas, and up until most recently, Russian natural gas. And if we say we would like to produce it based on or we would import the ammonium from Namibia, then of course parts of the European production capacities would leave the country. So we would have to decide whether we would transfer the production in Germany to Namibia, so to speak, and this is much more part of the discussion, also from the Namibian point of view, whether we want to do this. I mean, the Namibians want that. They want to build up this chemical industry in order to have value creation in the country, which will actually amount to many percentage points of the current GDP. And we would need the discussion in Germany too. Well, thank you very much for the very interesting information. I mean, this would be a shimmer of hope. I mean, if we look at the global value chains that are being dominated by the global, 80% of the global market are dominated by Chinese, American, or European large corporations. There's only little knowledge transfer. Many countries are at the end of the value chain and sweatshops, where with low salaries they have to create products. So this would be a completely different model, more job creation. There would also be a knowledge transfer. So this would actually be a real shift. I mean, Jörg, you called it from destruction to transformation. I mean, this would be one example. But how can we manage to get the large corporations and the large global value chains to do that? So how can we break up or reduce this dominance? And how can large corporations become part of this structure of local value creation and knowledge transfer? And Carlos Lopez this morning said it's the revolution of artificial intelligence and robotization, which leads to more pressure for the low-income countries, of which they cannot get out. So Namibia might be a special country which is not really in the focus of large investments usually. So to achieve a shift here would be very valuable, but even medium income countries like Mexico or South Africa or Morocco, Tunisia, they are faced with a lot of pressure. They want to develop technologically and also create jobs. And this is really a global task of international organizations, of partnerships, of corporations. How can we achieve a win-win situation in order to be successful in this transformation process? I mean, it always sounds good to create a win-win situation. However, the real-life power structures are different. And I think we should show a little more humbleness. I mean, if we put too much into the development cooperation, which actually should be done by the energy ministry, the economics ministry, and others, is too much. So now I taken up too much of the whole discussion, but now we'll go back to Ms. Kaiser. Well, I would like to ask a brief question regarding the Namibia project. Did I understand that correctly, that with that you would also provide green ammonium or green hydrogen to Namibia, and I mean, with this surplus that remains, well, along the whole value chain? I mean, we put differently, we start out with the desalination of seawater, and this is over-dimensioned. Secondly, on the electricity side, the electricity surplus is put into the Namibian electricity grid. There's a clear component for development cooperation, or the KfW, and this, of course, the grid needs to be enhanced so that this surplus of electricity can be taken into the grid. Then there is the hydrogen and then ammonium. Neither for hydrogen nor for ammonium do we have a market in Namibia today. So this means that the surplus what goes directly into the market is the electricity and replaces the South African coal-based electricity. And in terms of hydrogen or ammonium, you have to imagine that the investment is based on the export amounts. So ammonium and hydrogen can, in addition, be produced at threshold costs for the local market, but this does not necessarily invest or create funding for the local market. So, for example, the reduction of the production of iron ore is also part of it. So you could imagine there's a lot of hydrogen, ammonium is being produced, and you could reduce the amount of iron ore in order to produce raw steel. However, if the funding is safeguarded through the consumption in Europe, then everything else could chime in. And it makes it much more easy because a country like Namibia cannot provide 20 years of safeguards for investments in infrastructure projects.
The infrastructure for the surplus energy or green hydrogen, of course, all this needs to be guaranteed, and this again leads to the question: who feels responsible and who provides the financing? Well, would you like to go to the white chair or the hot chair, which sounds similar in German? Do take a seat.
Jörgs Frage und dieses Namibia-Beispiel nutzen.
Question and the question of Namibia should help us to build bridges to the question of today. What can development cooperation look like in the future? So this leads us to the initial question. Well, this may be totally overtaxing development cooperation. No, it's just moving away from the old project orientation in development cooperation towards supporting national programs. It's an orientation that we can already see in Namibia. Namibia's government is the one that will then decide, like, will we take this credit facility of the African Development Bank, or will we accept rather Tunisian or German investors in this particular area, or maybe a combination of the two, like EU and Chinese value chains? And
die Rolle der deutschen EZ wäre aus meiner Sicht,
cooperation would be, as I think, to encourage the partner countries and say, if you have good ideas that you can contribute, so that renewable energy programs on a national level can be created.
Wenn ihr gute Ideen habt, ein beschäftigungspolitisches Programm aufzustellen, wo wir die Frage auch integrieren. Die
question can be integrated, a question that is so dear to you, then we will be willing to cooperate on a basis of partnership and to contribute also to the conceiving and trade agreements between the EU and your country for this particular sector can be modified in a given way. And then we will be
diese
Development Bank and then to guarantee the demand and stabilize the demand. I think this is a connection between our questions, like how does Germany have to reinvent its global cooperation? So in the renewable energies area, there is already a number of promising examples And it could be a good practice example of how to get rid of the old approach in order to create a stable livelihood for those people who have to fear for their mere survival day by day. And by the way, we have been there. This was under the OECD agreement, under Minister Wieczorek-Zoil in the second half of the first decade of this millennium,
Länderprogrammunterstützungsprogramme.
Different countries support programs.
Generelle Budgethilfe und die Parlamente des Partnerlandes schaffen das schon für sich allein.
Blanket budgets, but there was a focus on partner countries for certain sectors, national programs for particular sectors. So this is what we support in negotiating programs in terms of trade policy, environmental policy, and we also support them in the context of technical or financial cooperation. And this again creates a link to the perspective that we envisaged in the coalition agreement towards multilateralism. And necessarily it will be national programs that, like Namibia, that cannot rely on German cooperation only. These are very interesting suggestions. And, well, Mr. Steinhilber, would you like to comment on that? I think there is a suggestion from the audience.
Ja, okay, also dann nehme ich kurz dazu, in den Nullerjahren, ja, haben wir heute auch, machen aber eigentlich alle Entwicklungsagenturen. Das
first decade of this millennium, yes, like policy-based programs. It was budgetary assistance. In certain cases, it means earmarking funds for certain programs and priorities. I think that's a very good approach, and there is even room for improvement. Nonetheless, let me say something that may not be a good fit for the general flow here, but we really made an effort because we did not know, we could not foresee the outcome of the elections, and we certainly didn't want to create one-off short-lived projects, but we really wanted to have a sustainable basis. So we wanted to create something that organically follows our ideas, and the implementation follows certain criteria and also certain quotas, and this will continue to be the case whether the minister now will pursue feminist development policy with the same enthusiasm. I do not know, but essentially it will stay the same and the quota will stay the same. And I have to say, in the past 3.5 years in the organizations, as I've seen them, and that was created a certain level of euphoria, and I think this was really quite interesting. So it was said that it's not just about quantity but also quality, and the KfW had certain problems there, and this is normal in the framework of infrastructural projects, but this gave rise to a lot of creativity, and thus this will continue along these lines. Well, we have a guest here.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. And it's really great that we have already devised a vision in this context. I have a very pragmatic question nonetheless. It's a question that is still a burning issue for me. We have to expect that 25% of our development cooperation funds may be cancelled. So what promises do we still have to fulfill? And what can be implemented? We have to wonder. So my question for the BMZ is, what will you manage to achieve in the meantime until our German Development Corporation has been readjusted? So, maybe also projects that used to be implemented by US aid in the past. I'm also thinking of the world of science. I'm thinking of projects that have proven to be successful, not only in the health sector, but also in the context of eradication of poverty. There are programs with a proven effect that have been cancelled now. Does it make sense in order to position Germany that certain projects could be continued? You know, there are projects where we know it made sense, it was successful, and now billions have been cancelled. Do you think there is a possibility of doing something immediately? And then how about strategic prioritizing? So this is moving away from visions, but it is something tangible that could be started tomorrow. So is there any strategy so far? Well, I think I said it this morning. Of course, we
Projekte weiterlaufen.
Wir
kriegen das natürlich auch jeden Tag, ich auch. Ich bin ja auch für Krise zuständig, wiedergespielt. Organisationen, wie die Lage auch. Großen, auch in erster Linie die Frage natürlich auch Hunger, World Food Program. Es ist schon so.
So it's a question of budget. As I said already, there will be fierce negotiations, and we really have to check we may be able to jump in and help. But one thing is sure, we will never be able to close this gap. It is two-digit billions, and we cannot make up for that. On the other hand, we do have to concede, you know, the World Food Program, for example. There are austerity measures.
Der Entwicklungsleistung von den Europäern und Europäerinnen
in terms of Europe compared with US aid. So it was drastic, and it's certainly a decline, speaking overall.
Ab und an mal früher Zahlen sozusagen veröffentlicht, wo wir gesagt haben, wir sind
publish figure, and we said we are the second largest giver, and on the giving side, well, we will not be able to mention it at all in the current public debate. So this is the situation we are confronted with. So we really have to.
Da habe ich große Hoffnung, dass das jetzt auch sich, sagen wir mal, Postwahl ein bisschen beruhigt, nicht unbedingt mit Blick auf eine Partei, aber auf die anderen Parteien. Aber wir werden da weiter im Zentrum auch.
But we are also in the center of observation and criticism. And thus this gap, when talking about
marginal lösen können. Das werden andere Ansätze sein. Ich meine, VN 80%.
85%. I said it after the summer break. Well, have to be provided.
Kompetenzen Polen sozusagen zusammenlegen, effizient
competencies and really economies of scale. But at the same time, we have to make it clear that we have a serious crisis where you simply need money. And I mentioned this before, the BMZ maybe just does not only need funds, but also a level of regulation. For example, the big Chinese Silk Road always wants to acquire export and import opportunities, but it's also about setting standards. It's something we can make an effort for when it comes to regulating free trade zones. It's about standard questions. And I think in setting standards, Europe does not fare that bad. But there are other priorities that we have to fight for, and I'm firmly convinced, unfortunately, that
von USAID, was wir im Moment befürchten, aber wir werden die Bilder sehen, sowohl mit Blick auf Migration.
But that's not everything. And then there is also the question of energy, and the USA is a strong factor and also a factor for vulnerable groups in different countries where civic structures were set up, and now it's about hunger and flight.
Well, this would be a great moment for stronger European cooperation, which means to discuss who is going to go into which country and into which sector. Of course, this will not solve the enormous funding problems, but it would be a starting point. Yes, indeed, it needs to be more about European cooperation, and the question is, what are we doing from a multilateral point of view, and what kind of instruments are the best. And yes, definitely, but we'll have to fight for it. My minister was the only minister during the last legislative period who appeared at the Council of Europe, and this is also a reality. We have to fight for it, that it remains very important. And if the European Union more strongly focuses only on the global gateway question, and if the whole issue of flight and the funding that is available there, maybe we could deviate something from it for the strengthening of the communities and not only fences in order to fend them off. This would be good, but it's not that easy. I mean, when we say, well, let's coordinate international development aid at the European level, I don't know who is coming because many sides do not know whom to send. This is a challenge, but it's quite clear the more difficulties we have, the more do we have to cooperate. Well, this is quite sobering. I thought that Europe would rather be a shimmer of hope and a different model, different from the US or the Chinese model. So I think this is also what we should fight for more intensively. So inclusivity, fight against climate change, etc. However, Europe definitely plays a major role regarding trade. So we have everything but arms that can be imported into the European Union, but the non-tariff obstacles are still there. So things remain to be done there. So at the European level, we need to act here, and with the global gateway also needs to be reformed and not only be a counter-model against China, but have a strong own concept as something that we should think about as well. Ms. Kaiser.
Entschuldigung. Ja, Europa haben wir jetzt.
Well, I mean, we now discussed Europe. We do not have much time left now. Let me take a look at my watch. We have 10 minutes to go now. I would like to open up a completely new topic, because in the coalition agreement it was said that we also will have to launch a North-South Commission. At least this is what the coalition agreement says. So what does it mean? And is this a repetition in view of the changes that we've talked about this morning? This seems to be not really possible from a substantial point of view. The Brexit is there. The Global South organize itself anew. I went to Rwanda and Sierra Leone for talks, and I heard, well, we want to have a South-South cooperation. North-South cooperation is no longer interesting for us because we are disappointed with the Europeans. They don't do much. So how do you assess the North-South Commission? Is this really going to be something which will allow us to make substantial headway? Sorry, the moderator is not using a microphone. Well, as you've said, there are individual phrases in the coalition agreement, and this is a phrase which is coming from the SPD, or at least I assume that it comes from the SPD. So I'm looking into it at the moment because now we have to fill these headlines with life. And yes, I would also like such a commission, but we have to make sure that we do not have double structures. I mean, we talked about the global perspective this morning, and I think that the Gates Foundation also want to develop a global commission based on Sevilla or whatever. But still, we have this top post of the North-South Commission, and wherever I go, to which panel I go, it electrifies people, and everyone wants to be a part of it. This is, of course, a good thing. But I do think that, first of all, the Commission cannot be called like that, because I think North-South is actually breathing the spirit of the 1970s and 80s a little bit. Well, I'll leave it at that. Some might even say it also reflects some of the political approaches. Well, but anyway, we have to think about what do we want to achieve with this commission. And of course, there are two different approaches. One is a classical North-South commission or a development policy commission as it was set up at the past. It was launched by the World Bank. It was not a German commission, of course, but it was Willy Brandt as the new Nobel Peace awardee, who was an integrative figure. And based on this commission, we have a lot of quotes, but not much has been implemented. This is also a result and also part of the historic truth. So, of course, we can set up such a commission. And, of course, there are different questions. How should an inclusive, rule-based world order look like? How can we calibrate things? An ambitious post-2030 agenda? Well, these are things that are possible. And the second one is an approach where we have to get a little bit away from this North-South Commission and focus it more strongly on Germany and ask whether we can renew the development cooperation in Germany and maybe reshape our partnership strategies. How can we conduct a partnership policy? What do we need for it? Also for such a commission. And we could say, well, okay, 2/3 of the commission or whatever come from the countries. How was it called? Not the Global South, but the global majority, as it was called today, earlier, and UN agencies. And well, this is a question that we have to discuss in Germany. And then automatically we come to topics. I think post-2030 agenda is a very important topic. It's also very important for our partner countries. And our credibility could grow if we show to be an advocate of such a post-2030 agenda. I think we still need to discuss many things. Should it remain with the BMZ or elsewhere? So this is something that we should do over the next few weeks and see how we progress. Thank you very much. Jörg, you also wanted to say something? Well, Mr. Steinhilber, you just said regarding Europe, well, nobody knew whom to approach, etc. Well, there's a great paper from Global Perspective on Germany. There are numerous global commissions. Ms. Espinosa surely knows 5 to 10. What's missing is actually the push to a European restructuring of the cooperation with the Global South. And there, Germany could take on the initiative. However, it should be a European thing. Yes, well, this is an approach, and I wouldn't say that it should be merely German, but what I wanted to say is that the partnership structure should be looked at. We should try to find out what is in the other side's interest, what are the other side's topics that we can work on jointly. Well, I would say that we do a short concluding round. I would suggest that you start, and then everyone can say 2 to 3 sentences, and then we are out of time, and then we will not summarize everything, but maybe focus on it. Well, I'll be very brief. As an energy company, partnership means energy partnership, energy trade partnership, and to reestablish them. And I think that we've shown how it can work, because you, in between mentioned the question, how can we make sure that the majors, the large corporations, join in and they also see the light and invest in green hydrogen? I mean, this is not a necessity, actually. The beauty about the new energy world we are moving in is that a company like Enatrag, with 1,200 employees, we have grown and were established over the past 20 years. And with 100 Enatrags, we could do well in Germany. We do not need 3 to 4 E.ONs or RWEs. So the diversity of actors was not possible in the past. I could not have large-scale coal-fired power plants with medium-sized businesses. However, this is different today, and I can scale this to the global level. I'm looking forward to an energy world where we no longer have 5 big players who invest or have to invest into the global energy infrastructure because they are big enough to do that. No, Enatrag, we can have a 10 million green hydrogen project in Namibia. And it's absolutely incredible when we say we want to be a long-term investor there. This is not something that cannot work. I mean, it's a beautiful new world that we are headed towards, because the more competition we have, the less we are dependent on old and outdated structures. And I think this can only be beneficial to everyone. Well, at the end, I would like to say one thing. It's about the topic of values and interests that we've touched upon this morning already. I'm a little bit scared when I look at the coalition agreement and listen to the current debates that geostrategic interests are put too high on top of the agenda. I'm realistic enough to see that the world as it is at the moment, or the way it changes, it of course needs to play a role. You can't avoid that. But if it's too much at the forefront, then it will damage ourselves, because in the partner countries, the impression will emerge that the partner countries will realize that we do that, and they will wonder how we can make a contribution to the solution of their problems. So we should not only focus on trying to outcompete the Chinese on the ground. I also like to remind you, and this is not meant as a nostalgic anecdote, but there was a very advanced concept of long-term and enlightened and well-informed interests. This stems from a coalition of 25 years ago, a red-green coalition. And these enlightened and well-informed own interests is in line with what the representative of Urgewald has said: global justice and peace, plus political stability in the partner countries, plus sustainable economy throughout the whole world, and thus a joint climate policy. All these interests are absolutely relevant and key interests of ourselves, and it would be good to, and Mr. Steinhuber has mentioned it this morning, our own interests are not detrimental, but the short-term own interests are detrimental. So products that can be produced in Africa, maybe also based on African raw materials like mango juice or mango jam, do not have to be produced in the EU, for example, with African workers, and then being exported again to the African countries. This is just a short-term interest which does not lead to global peace and stabilization. It leads to a destabilization, a lack of functioning democracies, and more migration flows. So all this is not in our own interest. This is just the short-term interest of the business world.
Die Märkte der Zukunft kann EZ aufbauen. Ich glaube, das ist sogar noch.
So this is what we focus on, the long-term interests.
Beschäftigung in unseren Nachbarkontinenten.
And this would also help the employment in our partner countries. We shouldn't think so short-sighted. In the coalition agreement, it says that the raw material interests and the export interests are there. And this is sounds very neo-colonial. This is what we already did to keep the countries in a dependency. They should deliver our raw materials and the raw materials we need. So that's not what we want. We have to get away from that. And this concept, this old concept of this enlightened or informed long-term own interests is very relevant here. Thank you very much. This was, well, a flamboyant speech here. So are we embarking on this path of this coalition, geostrategic, raw material interests, export markets? Will we go that way, or rather go into the direction of inclusivity and climate change, protection against climate change, etc.? But no, Ms. Kaiser. Well, I was about to say that I'll try to be brief. Well, different topics have been touched upon, and I would like to focus on the German development cooperation and how we started out in the session. What I would like to see for the German development cooperation is the following. The debate that we've seen over the past weeks or months should change. At the moment, we are in a difficult situation. Nobody is really eager to launch a real reform of the development cooperation. And now my hope is for the next 4 years is that the situation calms down, that we focus, and that all the evidences that we see in the ministry or the partner organizations, that we sit down and think about a possible reform for the whole system. Now we have the time. We do not have such a polarized discussion anymore, and this is what I would like to see for the German development cooperation. And I'm interested to see how this is being implemented over the next 4 years. Ms. Sudmann, well, what's very important for me is that over the next 4 years, Germany shows that it's a reliable partner again. This will have a positive effect on all areas, on economic cooperation, on security, on geopolitical topics, but also, of course, on the values that are important to us. I think what's very important in Germany is, some kind of down-to-earth discussion, that we think across ministries about how we want to focus our work and on different topics. We want to avoid that every ministry is working on parts of an overall topic, and we want to focus on the matter at hand. And what's also very important, it has been mentioned several times already today, that international organizations are involved, and that Germany is actually taking on a leading role with this coalition, because it's quite clear that the funding will go down, and now we just have to prevent the worst. And most importantly for us is climate funding, and also making sure that there's a consistent further path towards a reduction of emissions, and also sufficient funding for the adaptation to climate change, because much of what we've discussed today will have a positive value added. Mr. Steinhilber, well, I said quite a lot today. I'm not going to say that much anymore. I think we have to, make sure. I mean, we also have described quite a realistic picture today, and we've shown that development policy, is under stress, but we still have to realize that we still have a lot of power either. So we have some room for shaping things. We have diverse relationships abroad via the embassies or the GIZ, the KfW, the civil society. So there are many actors, and they can all support us. And so far, I think it's very important to keep this in mind. We should be a little bit more optimistic. I'd just like to remind you that, of course, we are in a difficult phase when it comes to the multilateral system. But in the past, we also had to face up to difficult situations. And insofar, I would say that the prerequisites are good. Of course, the environment is a little bit difficult, but we still have means and tools with which we can shape things, and we should do that. And I can only promise to you we will do that, you will do that, and then eventually something good will come out of it. So I would like to thank everyone now. I think we have a lot of power, we have a lot of leeway to shape things, we have a lot of soft power to push things. We are in a phase of changes in view of the crises that we are faced with globally, and in view of the funding cuts that take place in the field of international development cooperation. But if we use the soft power and the leeway to shape things, then of course we can also influence the government. And then hopefully not everything will come after our geopolitical interests. So thus we will be able to push our ideas, and we will, of course, see how the government has gone into that direction. I would like to finish with a quote from Wanda, the Viennese band.
Singt Wanda, eine wunderbare Band.
Wanda, a beautiful band, says, well, it has to go on. And I think the discussion has to go on. We will focus, the debates will go on in order to give a new push to development cooperation. And I think the discussion today with the experts here and you has made a contribution to rethink our toolbox and to enter into this discussion. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.